working out which universities have the best reputation, not just in Australia, but globally for the course that I want to study, and then using it as that sort of initial filter. That's how it was useful for me. And I certainly wouldn't recommend using it as the sole determinant of what you study. You also, particularly for an undergraduate student looking at studying their first course, certainly things like open days, things like talking to current students, previous students, these are all critically important. Rankings by themselves, I don't think they would give you enough information to make that decision.
G'day and welcome to the Choosing Your Uni podcast. I'm your host, Rob Malicki, coming to you today from Garibaldi Land in Sydney. And as you're going through this journey to university, one of the things that you're going to see, and pretty much everywhere you go as you're going through this journey to uni, you're going to come across information about how a particular university ranks, whether it's on websites, whether it's in marketing information and brochures. And that's what today's episode is all about. University rankings. What are they? How they work? And to dive into the details of this, I'm really lucky to be joined by Chris Strods, who's a senior insight specialist with QS, Quacquarelli Simmons, who's one of the major organisations that turns out a really, really excellent series of rankings about universities, not just about Australian universities, but about global institutions. Chris, thanks for joining me on the Choosing Your Uni podcast.
Thank you, Rob. Great to be here.
Awesome to have you here. Maybe we can kick off. You can just talk a little bit about your journey to uni. Where did that start?
So I spent most of my childhood in Geelong, went through high school there, graduated high school, the age of 18. I got a little bit sort of itchy feet, decided that I wanted to go up to the big smoke for university. So I enrolled in a Bachelor of Computer Science at RMIT. Ended up doing a few more courses on top of that. But my first experience of university was a Bachelor of Computer Science at RMIT. One of the first things that I did when I moved from Geelong to Melbourne to study, actually it's a bit of a funny story and I've brought a prop that I can share with you. I moved into a share house in Ascot Vale. I joined the local library and I borrowed a book, which I immediately lost. At that point, I was a poor uni student. I didn't really want to pay any overdue fines or any replacement fees. So I just never went back to the library. Years passed, and then only a few weeks ago, doing some spring cleaning, and I stumbled across this book. I think about 13 or 14 years later. I do plan to return it the next time I'm in the area. I've since moved away, but yeah, it was a bit of a nostalgia. I was thinking back as to the position that my life was in when I first took out this book and where I am now. And got a bit of nostalgia for my university days.
That's hilarious. And when you walk back in, like, there's going to be some sort of alarm that goes off, like a red siren in there. And somebody's going to come down and arrest you and hand you a fine for like $50,000.
I think so.
That's really funny. Computer science at RMIT, actually, I know today's about rankings, and I promise we're going to get there, but that's a really good program at RMIT. Yeah, tell me about some of the highlights for you of having gone through a computer science program.
I was probably a little bit ahead of the curve in the sense that being a nerd is cool. It's probably a much more fashionable degree now than it was perhaps when I enrolled. I always grew up loving computers, tinkering, building them, dabbling with coding, that kind of stuff. So it was I really knew from when I was an early teenager, that's sort of what I wanted to do. And it was a fantastic program. I learned a lot, and a lot of those skills that I learned in some of those first year undergraduate courses are skills that I still use today in my day-to-day work. It was fantastic. I did get to the end of that course and I felt, I don't know whether I'm ready for the workplace. I don't think that I perhaps didn't throw myself into the university experience as much as I could have. So I'll start again. I did a second course, a Bachelor of Social Science, again at RMIT. Really loved the university. I did sort of those degrees back to back. My parents weren't very happy because they wanted me to go and get a job, but I just really love university. I love studying. I love learning. And that was kind of 6 years of my life.
This is getting really interesting because you say social sciences, I'm starting to see the link through to where you are now working for QS and doing insights. So what came next in your journey? How have you ended up working at QS?
So my first job out of university was working in professional services, consulting, management consulting. I wasn't very good at it. It was a great company to work for, but it perhaps just wasn't the greatest skill set for me. So I did that for a couple of years. I probably learned a lot of those sort of soft executive skills, things like time management, organization, project management. I learned a lot, but I found that kind of mix of skills perhaps just wasn't wasn't the best sort of fit for me. So I ended up pivoting a little bit, a very, very early sort of career pivot to market research, working for a advocacy PR communications company, doing market research, polling, which got me sort of into that analytics, insights, data analysis, which I think was actually a really great synthesis of those two courses, because you do need a lot of that technical side for cleaning, manipulating, analyzing data, but you also need that kind of that the social science aspect of my studies really helped with the interpretation, the contextualization, and being able to really turn some of that grunt work with working with data into sort of the insights and within sort of that social context. I did that for a few years, and then the next step was taking on a role at QS in 2019. Firstly, managing the QS International Student Survey, as well as a domestic student survey, a few other market research projects, and then transitioning into a role within the consulting team, looking at institutional performance, and particularly with a focus on university rankings.
Yeah, this is awesome. That's been a really great picture of how you've gotten to where you are. Maybe before we jump into the ranking stuff, QS does so much stuff, but just a really broad brushstroke about the organisation and what it does, who it serves. So
I suppose QS likes to see itself as one of the world's leading service providers to the higher education sector. And services encompasses a lot. A lot of our offerings are direct to students. So in terms of, we help universities run events to help recruit students. We help universities manage inquiries, applications, offers from students. We also have working directly with universities for consulting on things like institutional performance, which captures research outputs, consulting on sustainability, consulting on helping recruit more students. It is an extremely sort of broad spectrum of services that we provide, but it's likely that if you have been, by the time you get to the end of your university studies in Australia, it's quite likely that you will have hit a QS touch point at some point in your studies.
Yeah, whether you realise it or not. And of course, one of the most visible elements of QS in that sense, the many rankings that the organisation puts out, and we'll dive into what some of those are and what they mean. But perhaps we just start right at the top. What is a ranking for those people who may have only just seen a number on paper?
At QS, we produce the QS World University Rankings, which are a way of essentially comparing, measuring, and benchmarking universities all around the world against each other across a set of metrics. We've run these rankings for 21 years now. In the most recent survey, in the most recent ranking, we ranked 1,500 universities around the world. It's essentially a way of measuring university performance. So the university ranking, the overall broad global world university rankings we produce, look at things like reputation within the academic community, within the employer community. We look at research outputs. We look at internationalization in the form of international student and faculty ratios. We look at employment outcomes, sustainability, things like that, to sort of get sort of like a really robust, holistic look at the performance of the university so that they can be sort of measured and benchmarked against each other.
Yeah, I'm glad you started to break that down a little bit there, because one of the things that's always struck me about rankings is just seeing that sort of top line number. University is ranked X in the world, or has moved up, X number of places, doesn't necessarily tell the full story. Whereas for an individual, if they're really interested in sustainability, the fact that they can dive into a sustainability ranking might be more relevant to them and their decision of where they might want to go and study. Can we break down some of those rankings that QS offers? You've sort of run through them pretty quickly.
So we have the World University Rankings, which I've just discussed. Probably the two other rankings which I think would be most relevant for an Australian audience are the subject rankings. So we produce individual rankings on, at the moment, 56 different subjects, where you can go and see where a particular university performs in terms of its research outputs and its reputation within the academic and employer community compared to sort of global peers across 56 different subjects. We also have the very new QS Sustainability Rankings. We've released 2 editions of this ranking, and the third one is due out in a couple of months. And this measures a university's commitment to and performance sustainability across a fairly sort of wide spectrum of components. We can break that down into 3 main components, which we call environmental impact, So that's probably what people most think when we think about sustainability. So teaching environmental sustainability, researching environmental sustainability, things like, climate change, anti-pollution, these types of things that you kind of typically associate with sustainability, and also incorporation of sustainability principles into sort of campus operations. So that's when we're talking things like, recycling on campus, solar panels, sustainable buildings, energy efficiency, that type of thing. So that's the environmental sustainability aspect of it. We also have the social impact, which is when we start talking about things like commitments to gender equality, racial equality, equal opportunity, sort of a commitment to that both in terms of what the campus offers, in terms of research outputs. And then finally, we also have a new lens which we've added this year, which is called good governance. So this is kind of assessing whether a university has sort of the frameworks in place to govern and direct sustainable activities sort of across the campus operations.
This is really fascinating, isn't it? Because as I was alluding to before, everybody has their own interest areas. And so by having this range of different rankings, it really allows you to drill down. If all that matters to you is like the top level prestige, inverted commas, of an institution, then maybe the world university ranking is the one that's most important to you. If you're really thinking about academic disciplines, then there's a subject ranking for you. And then those other sorts of areas, which, I think are becoming increasingly important, environmental, social, governance. Those are also, you can drill down into the details of those as well, or a combination of the above. That's all pretty good. Can we maybe talk a little bit about how they're calculated? You did mention before that there are sort of components that are measured. For example, with the World University Rankings, you're talking about research output and other things, but typically, without getting into micro detail of it, how these rankings are sort of constructed. What does QS look for?
Sure. So the overall World University Rankings are constructed from 9 different indicators. So we have the reputational aspects. So the academic reputation, which is the most significant component to an institution's rank, which is conducted from an annual survey that we conduct from academics around the world. We ask them to nominate which universities within their own country and globally they think are producing the best sort of research outputs within their own sort of specialty field. We have employer reputation, which is an equivalent exercise, but we conduct it with employers around the world, and we're asking them to nominate which universities they feel are producing the best graduates within their sort of the field in which they're hiring for. So that's the reputational aspect. We also have, as I said, research outputs. So we measure citations per faculty, which is sort of simply a measure of how well a university's research, the impact of a university's research in terms of whether it's being reused, whether it's being cited by other universities around the world, whether it's sort of being picked up and utilized and reused to sort of expand on sort of the global corpus of knowledge. We have International Research Network, which measures the international connections that universities have in their research operations. So are they conducting a lot of joint research with other universities? And where is that joint research being conducted? Is it across a wide range of subjects or a narrow range? Is it mainly in wealthy sort of comparable countries, or are the universities looking to collaborate with countries in sort of developing economies, looking at collaborating with countries in sort of the emerging economies? We also look at internationalization in the form of international student ratio, international faculty ratio, based on the idea that an internationalized campus where you are interacting with people from different countries, different cultures, both in terms of your peers and in the people that are teaching you, is conducive to a good educational experience.
Great research around that. So that's my passion area, internationalization. I'm an international educator going back 20 years, so that's very close to my heart. And you see it both on campus, the diversity that it brings to a campus, the creativity. There's a very clear link between internationalization and diversity and creativity, plus the experiences for students to then be able to travel abroad as well and broaden their horizons.
And that is an aspect which Australian universities across the board generally do extraordinarily well. We have among the most internationalized campuses of anywhere in the world. We also measure sustainability. As I mentioned, there is a sustainability ranking, but the sustainability ranking also forms a component of the overall World University Ranking. We measure graduate outcomes in terms of employment rates and in terms of production of sort of notable alumni. That's sort of the World University Rankings in a nutshell, those 9 indicators. And overall, we put them all together, we weight them differently, and then we end up with kind of an overall score and a ranking.
Nice. Awesome.
G'day, it's Rob here. Hey, are you a parent or a carer of a student that's thinking of going to uni in the years ahead?
Did you know that Choosing Your Uni has a whole bunch of resources that are just for people like you? And you can find those at parents.choosingyouruni.com. You're going to find things like links to our Facebook community, downloadable worksheets, and heaps of advice by parents for parents. It's all the sort of stuff that you need to help guide your student on their journey to uni and beyond. Check it out now, parents.choosingyouruni.com. Okay, let's jump into then the subject rankings. How are those constructed?
So they're a little bit simpler. So we look at two lenses, reputation and research. So we use academic reputation survey data and employer reputation survey data, and the weight in which we the lens in which we the extent to which we look at each survey is dependent on the field. If we find that it's a field that's producing a lot of academic research and the production of research is kind of central to that field. So for example, medicine produces a lot of academic research. We'll weight that academic reputation much higher. For one that's perhaps not as academically focused, then we might look at employer reputation higher. We also measure research outputs in terms of citations per faculty, citations per paper, a few other IRN, H-index. I won't get into too much detail about how they're calculated, but essentially measures of research outputs within a particular subject field.
Okay, and just briefly, just before we kind of talked about the environmental, social, governance ranking, and I think you went into some pretty good detail about that one. When you were just talking about the academic rankings, that one to me is one of the most useful as people are going through and making their decision-making process. But maybe, Chris, you can talk a little bit about how people can use these different rankings as part of their decision-making process.
Yeah, sure. I agree. I think for an Australian audience, a particular one that's for a student who's probably looking at studying within their own country, I think the subject rankings are probably the most useful. I could use an example because I actually went back to university 4 years ago, right at the start of the pandemic. I figured I'm at home, got a little bit of extra free time. Why not go back to school? So I'll talk you through what my decision-making process was like. I knew approximately what I wanted to study. I went back and I ended up doing a master's of data science. But the process to get to that was I knew, I work in the field, so I kind of had a pretty good knowledge of what all of the universities in Australia were. I knew that I was probably going to be studying online because it was the middle of a pandemic. So that kind of opened up the whole country to me as a potential study destination. I wasn't limited to a university within commuting distance. From that, I wanted to know what is going to be the best university to study what I want to study. And so I thought the subject rankings will be a great start. So we can go to the subject rankings. We can look at your particular field that you're interested in. At the time, QS didn't produce a data science subject ranking, but they now do. So I looked at computer science, I looked at maths, I looked at statistics, I looked at those related fields, and I looked at the universities within Australia that were kind of appearing in the higher end of those rankings. And that kind of got me started working down that funnel of what I think are going to be the best universities to study what I want to study. So I went there, I got a short list of 5 or 6. And then from there, I started looking into it a little bit more, downloading course guides, having a look around the websites, having a look at fees, and going through all of those other stages to work out what university was going to be best for me. So I used it as that initial funnel, going in with no real knowledge of which universities are going to be the best for this, working out which universities have the best reputation, not just in Australia, but globally for the course that I want to study, and then using it as that initial filter. That's how it was useful for me. And I certainly wouldn't recommend using it as the sole determinant of what you study. You also, particularly for an undergraduate student looking at studying their first course, certainly things like open days, things like talking to current students, previous students, these are all critically important. Rankings by themselves, I don't think they would give you enough information to make that decision. But I think for me, they were a really critical part at working out who the leaders are in the area that I knew that I wanted to study.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you specified that. I see it very much the same way. It's that really good top-level filter, and particularly if there's a discipline that you're really attracted to, you really know that you want to go and do nursing, or you really know you want to go and do engineering, those sorts of things, because it does help point you in the direction of that handful of unis that you really want to narrow down to. And then emphasizing what you said, going down that next step where you're going in for specific information. I think particularly at postgraduate level, you might be looking for a particular set of electives or a particular specialization that you really want to do. But equally at undergraduate, if you really know what you want to do, then starting to get into the course guides, the course structures for particular degrees is kind of that next step down. Student on-campus experiences, extracurricular activities, etc., become really valuable. And then I guess maybe layering that up as well. If sustainability is really important to you, then going and cross-checking a particular institution's performance on sustainability. As you say, Australian unis have done a really good job on that particular one.
Yeah, they have. And informing the student decision-making process was the whole rationale for the sustainability ranking. So before we released the initial rankings in 2022, we did a large amount of research on students all around the world understanding, is this important to you? Is this the kind of thing that you're looking at? And would this affect your decision on where to study? And we found the answer is yes. It might not be the single most important factor, but it's certainly something that students are really looking at. They want to know that the university that they're studying at, committing several years of their life to, is a good global citizen, is that they share their values, and that they know that they can say that they study at this university with pride, knowing that they are walking the walk.
Yeah, I love that. Is there anything that people need to be wary about when it comes to rankings? And maybe while I let you reflect on that, like for me, coming back to that world university rankings, that the thing I always urge caution is, like, is that important to you? It's very easy to see a high number or a low number, and then like an institution is the number X, and therefore it must be amazing across the board. But to some extent, that's a cognitive bias. It's a shortcut, if you like. And so to me, I'm saying, I like to say, with that world ranking, if prestige is really important to you, then obviously weight that more highly. Consider that more highly. But otherwise, for me, like, dive more into the subject-specific rankings. Are there other words of caution or things that you think people should think about when they're using rankings?
Well, I think the most important thing is to think about what really matters to you before you start sort of making those decisions. There's a really famous quote from a statistician named George Box, and he said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And the QS World University rankings are no exception. They are a model. We take 9 indicators and we try to turn that into a holistic assessment of the global university population, but it doesn't measure everything. It doesn't measure your personal affinity for a campus. It doesn't measure other things like your own personal proximity to a campus. It doesn't measure which other friends are going to that campus that you might be. There are lots of things that it doesn't measure, and all of those need to sort of form part of the decision-making process. If you go to 2 open days and you go to one and they're ranked 50 in the world, and you go, yeah, this is okay. And then you go to one that's ranked 250 in the world and you go, I really love this place. I love the people. I love the environment. Well, then I would recommend that the 250 ranked university is probably better for you. 250 is still extraordinarily elite in sort of a global context. It's a filter, but it shouldn't be the only filter, and it needs to be contextualized with what you're really looking for and what feels right to you.
Oh, yeah, I'm really glad you said that. That's so true. Essentially, Australia, at time of recording, is one of the top higher education systems in the world, usually put in the same sort of basket as the US and the UK, but very high quality education system here. And the reason for that is because for decades, successive governments have had oversight and legislation that's been in place to maintain that level of quality. So I think regardless of which Australian institution you end up going to study at, you're going to get a good degree. And unlike some other regions in the world, employers, I'm casting a massive generalization here, but employers are typically probably less obsessed about which institution you've been to. The Australian higher education system in a global context is very strong.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to end up with a bad product. It's just a matter of making sure it's the right one for you.
That's right. Exactly right. Chris, this is really helpful for somebody that may have seen some of these numbers on marketing materials, in brochures, on websites. What's the next step for them? Where do they start in terms of drilling down and finding out what's relevant to them and using that?
So the best place to go is www.topuniversities.com. This is our website, which includes all of our rankings. It includes your blog posts. It includes events. It includes all of the information that we provide that a student might need to help them on their decision-making journey.
Fantastic. Hey, Chris, this has been a really great conversation. And for those people listening along at home, once again, that URL, topuniversities.com, super easy to find. I mean, even if you just jump on Google and Google QS World Rankings, you're going to find them, and the site's really easy to navigate, easy to jump down into the Australian institutions, look through subject discipline areas, the sustainability, social and governance ranking stuff is up there as well. Really good to have you on the podcast, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for inviting me.
Catch you next time. At Choosing Your Uni, our mission is to make finding your ideal institution and your degree fun, easy and stress-free. So if you're looking to save some time, to discover more and to get personalised advice for every step of your journey, check out choosingyouruni.com. Our theme music is composed by Pasha Shogi and his band Flow, and this episode has been researched and constructed on Gadigal land in Sydney. Until next time, have yourself an awesome day.